Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Underworld Contacts. I am your host, or MC as it is known, Code Marvelous, and today we're going to be doing a different RPG from The Blades in the Dark. This is kind of a meeting of the two contents for me, because we are going to be playing a Sprawl cyberpunk RPG set in the world of Netrunner, otherwise known as the Android universe. I have some very fine people here from the Netrunner community and the RPG community joining me to bring this story to life. Let's go ahead and we'll introduce our players, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the system and dive into Session 0 of Underworld Contacts. So why don't we start up top, and we'll start with you, Derek. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what playbook you're thinking about playing today.
Well, my name's Derek Billings, known to some in the community. I'm kind of thinking about an infiltrator concept that I'm kicking around. I've got a biotechnology corporation in mind that I want some help fleshing out, and so we're going to go from there.
Nice. All right. Ryan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan. I'm from Chicago. Play here at Netrunner in the Chicago community with Derek, and I'm thinking about playing the Killer playbook. I'm thinking about a corporation's kind of tied to Wayland and some land development and those sorts of things.
All right, Chris, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris. I don't play Netrunner, so this is going to be fun because I picked the hacker. So we'll all learn together.
Or the Netrunner, if you will.
Yeah.
Probably.
All right, and Patrick?
All right.
Hi, I'm Patrick. I play Netrunner in the New York community, but I'm originally from the UK, where I used to play in London. I will be playing a fixer, and my corp is going to be Global Sec.
Nice. All right. So, just kind of to frame the initial game that we're going to be doing here, we're going to be playing a system which, as I said, is called Sprawl. It's by Hamish Cameron. It's fantastic. Check it out. I'm going to put a link to that in the VOD notes. I can also link it momentarily. But in the meantime, it is a cyberpunk powered by the apocalypse system. So, Powered by the Apocalypse is a system like a modular IKEA furniture roleplay system where you can build out everything around like a single mission, a single job, right? Like a contained arc of accomplishing a set goal. And then the characters progress in a kind of incremental way instead of the traditional experience and loot format of more traditional crunchy systems. The other real hallmark of the Sprawl and other Powered by the Apocalypse systems is that the world building is collaborative. So we're going to be building the world together as a team so that we're all more invested in the story that we're telling, and we all know what kind of story we're looking to do. And everything is fiction forward. Instead of rolling to find out what happens, like with traditional Dungeons and Dragons or White Wolf systems where it's more based on, let me roll, and then we'll talk about, role-playing out the outcome of the roll. The players will tell me what they want to see happen. We roll and see how complicated whatever they've described becomes. So it's fiction forward, and the players have a lot more autonomy over how their characters solve or are affected by negative outcomes. So, I wanted to start tonight's session, before we really dive into the character creation and corp creation, I wanted to talk a little bit about the setting that we're going to be in, the Android setting for which Netrunner is based. So, obviously, Chris is at a somewhat disadvantage. So for Chris, this question is more so some of the key elements of cyberpunk that he would like to see play out. But let's talk a little bit about what kind of are the defining features of the Android universe that we want to see come to the fore in this campaign. I'll start. So one of the big things for me that separates the Android setting from traditional cyberpunk, let's say, is that it's somewhat optimistic, but also more naive, right? There's more of a veneer of shine on everything, whereas like 80s cyberpunk is everything's kind of gross, dirty, worn down, right? Whereas in Android, the veneer is a lot brighter, and the technology has led to maybe more net positives, but there's still that underbelly that's just even more well hidden than it is in traditional cyberpunk.
I have an idea about how that could be put, and that is that the original Neuromancer cyberpunk setting came about during the Reagan and the Thatcher years, when our view of the future was very Cold War oriented and maybe more pessimistic, and then the Android setting more or less got its start during the Obama years, when we kind of thought things were maybe on an upswing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. But that's like a big element for me, is that, and that's where we got like the more neon and like the more almost like a futurist like 60s aesthetic of some of like the older Android cards and some of the early Netrunner cards, where it's more like a new boom kind of feel to it almost. So who would like to go next? Who has an element of the Android or like the cyber noir universe that they'd like to touch on?
One of the I guess. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm going second.
All right. I guess one of the things that, in reading about the Android universe, that kind of was interesting to me is, I guess, the transhuman element, where you have the clones and I guess androids, just what makes a human, that sort of thing. So I guess we can get into that more as you guys teach me about the setting some.
Yeah. And that's a big, well, of course, the androids features very strongly in the Android universe. But more specifically, what the android's existence says about humanity and its relations to money and other things is very interesting as well. Yeah.
Anyway, what I was going to say is, going back to, I just a couple weeks ago played through a session of the board game with some friends here in Chicago, and Android as a setting, and this is what really distinguishes it from cyberpunk, that they decided to call it cyber noir, is that Android setting is a lot more aware of the larger science fictional universe. So instead of just like gritty street level matrix oriented, technology oriented stories that typify the cyberpunk genre, we also have things like the Beanstalk. We have the Martian colonies. We have a lot of the social concerns, and I think the DNA from that comes from the larger science fictional universe. So an awareness of that, and at times almost a humor in the elements that they pull in and juxtapose with each other by things. One of my favorite cards from Netrunner is the Turtlebacks card, which is straight out of the novel Ghost Brigades, and it's clones engineered to operate in a vacuum. Why do you need that in a story? Because it's creative and it's cool. It doesn't have anything to do with the gritty, seamy, throw a bucket of water into this alley to clean out the filth. It's an entirely different concept, and this is a world that has all of those elements in it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think a big part of that is what you're talking about is that if the camera in like traditional cyberpunk is like super zoomed in on the individuals and like the street level, the camera is very much so backed up in the Android universe, where the scope of, hey, like cyberpunk's great and all, but have you thought about like how cyberpunk would change like the way we do this, or the way like transhumanism would change the way we do this? Like the scope is much bigger of asking how the cyberpunk roots can be interpreted to affect things that we now know, are going to be in our future. Like, one of the things that I love the most about Android is it's like, hey, let's look at the lens of cyberpunk through non-Western cultures and see how those elements would play out in non-Western, less individualistic cultures. But yeah, anyway, I've already talked too much in this segment. So, who would like to go next?
Well, I kind of agree with what Derek was saying about how, like, the juxtaposition of things in the Android universe and how it kind of really plays to, like, the extremes of cyberpunk, where you've got what is a very well developed and quite diverse world with lots of characters from different backgrounds and different races and different genders, and all kind of across the spectrum of all of the different kind of demographics. But at the same time, it's still kind of, there's that kind of lurking fascism in the background with kind of what Wayland are doing, and it really kind of plays up to the fact that there's this big, broad, diverse world, even within the setting of New Angeles. We play the New Angeles board game a few times, and each of the districts is like Rabotogrod and Cayambe and all of these different kind of names taken from different languages and stuff. And yeah, there's still this kind of overwhelming layer of the kind of authoritarianism that it is quite common in things like cyberpunk. But also the kind of the juxtaposition between such big riches in the likes of MBN and Wayland, and such extreme poverty in some of the places that are depicted, and that kind of thing is what really kind of I like about the Android universe. So
yeah, and I think that really hit the nail on the head there, because I think that's one of the big things. Whereas traditional cyberpunk, like Neuromancer, there really aren't many positives shown, right? I think Android is like, hey, this would be, you'd have all that fascism and corporate dominance, but, like, things would probably get better socially, kind of, right? And, like, transhumanism would fix some of these problems that we have, like, socially, right? So it shows that the technology would have positives for a lot of people and also come at huge costs. Ryan, what about you? What would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I came to the Android universe through playing Netrunner, and I really didn't know anything about cyberpunk prior to playing Netrunner. So I came to it because I liked the game. But it really feels like a mix of things that I don't think before this I would have thought could have mixed. So it's got that noir piece, it's like 1930s kind of feel to it, like what the 1930s future would be. But then it really does deal with a lot of like kind of what feel like modern issues. I also like that because it is the future, the world is it's a very globalized society, and so a lot of the things that would kind of make us in different categories and groups today like don't apply as much in the future. In a world where people can go to the moon in a couple of days or something like that. It's just a very different kind of world culture that kind of builds up in that globalized society.
Yeah, there's actually if anybody here watched the Altered Carbon Netflix series that was on recently.
No.
Oh god, I loved that.
But there was this one throwaway line that made me immediately think of Netrunner, and it's been too long since I read the book, so I can't remember if this was a direct quote from the book or not. But Lawrence Bancroft, the main antagonist of the book, is like, I was born several hundred years ago in London, back when such things mattered. Because in the time in which he lives, where you are born is meaningless. You know what I'm saying? Like, the world has become so globalized, being English is more or less not a thing. Like, it's not a thing that anybody cares about. You know what I mean? And
I don't remember if that line is in the book, but it definitely, that concept is all through the book. It's all about that theme of identity, and the instability of identity is all through the book.
Yeah. So, these are some of the big themes of the Android universe, and these are a lot of the things that we're going to be touching on through the course of the missions that we're going to take, the way we're going to play against the corpse, and the way our hard Scrabble people and semi-people are going to work their way through trying to scrape out a living as, to a degree, outsiders in the Android universe. People who are not the traditional winners in the Android society, right? Not comfy corporate employees. So, one of the central things around playing the Sprawl is that we focus on creating the world ourselves. So the first thing that we're going to do is we need to define the corporation. So what we're going to do is we are going to move over to our clock screen. And clocks are at the center of this game. So clocks go from 1500 to 2400. So they go from 3 p.m. to midnight. Or, yeah, 3 p.m. to midnight. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be building corps. And as we engage in missions against them, as we push against these corporations, their clocks are going to fill. And as they get closer to midnight, the more dangerous our world is going to get as the corps work more actively to disrupt the party's activities. So these are just placeholders for now. We're going to update them as we discuss this more. But every player, including myself, will be adding a corporation to our list and building out the details of that corporation. And then when we get to the links phase, we're going to be working on how exactly our character has interacted with that corp in the past. So let's talk a little bit about that. So does anybody have a very clearly defined idea or a pretty clear idea of their corp that they'd like to share to start?
I mean, I guess mine is GlobalSec, which is a kind of already established corporation in the Android universe. Yeah, I think that I tried to look up some information about GlobalSec online earlier on, and surprisingly there was none. But I guess that basically all we know about them really in the setting is that they employ Sonny LeBeau, who's one of the runners that you can play as in Netrunner. But they're a private security firm that seemingly does testing work for servers and that kind of thing for the other corporations. They also offer kind of personal private security, like in-person security and that kind of thing. I know in terms of tags, I figured they would probably be discreet to a certain extent, and also militant, maybe, or some other kind of equivalent of that word, were the two that came to mind. But
okay, so let's talk a little bit about your corporation. So GlobalSec is interesting in the Android universe because it's not one of the big fish, right? I mean, it is, but it isn't. It isn't one of the core corporations, but it's basically like a contractor of a lot of the other corporations put together, right? It provides this like objective security force. It's almost like a Switzerland security company, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not necessary. It's a security company that's not beholden to any other corporation in the Android universe. So before we even do the tags, let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you think defines GlobalSec.
As far as I know, one of the things that defines them is their customers are other corporations. They're not really a public-facing company. So what they do, are security projects for, Wayland or for Jinteki, and in that capacity, Sunny, will interact with those corporations in her capacity as a GlobalSec employee, and if she happens to get flatlined, well, then, that's just... For GlobalSec, it's the cost of doing business. For her, it's, just a risk that's probably in her employee contract. But I think, where we might run into interacting with GlobalSec, might be as a follow-on effect for, something that we do involving some other corp. They might come at us sideways.
The way I always saw it with Sunny was that she would be running against these corporations as like a test, and that all of the really like brutal stuff wouldn't be like turned on in air quotes. So the flatline would happen, but it wouldn't happen. You know, she wouldn't die to meat damage or brain damage. It would be a case of, okay, it's like a war game scenario where, you know, you can be like, okay, you have infiltrated our defenses and have been detected, and we're pressing this button and you're dead. Try again.
Right.
Rather than it being like an actual, like, well, Global Sec lost another runner, I guess we've got to go and hire somebody else now. You know, I don't think that would be worth their money to be constantly recruiting people because somebody died. So I always saw it as this kind of like it's like a kid mode running a little bit, where it's the gloves are on a little and nobody actually dies.
Well, going back to, and I don't mean to necessarily, you know, argue the point very strenuously. Going back to Altered Carbon, one of the lines that's in the really the final villain monologue in the book is, human life is extraordinarily cheap. Where do you get this idea that human life has value? And for me, it's a more dramatic decision, or it's a more dramatic option for, you know, life to actually be on the line for them. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, but that's
I'm
something
not-
we can uncover in the course of the game. But the big thing is that one of the big things that I'd like to bring in, and I'd like everybody to weigh in a little bit on each corp as much as they can, or every idea as much as they can. I think one of the things that makes Global Sec stylistically unique in the Android setting is that they are cyberspace and meat space. Like, if anybody here has played the New Angeles board game, one of the things in the New Angeles board game is that their executive is Lydia. Oh man, I actually looked at it earlier so I would remember the name. Lydia, and I forget her last name, but she's an Martian war military veteran, driving home that Global Sec is two-fronted. They provide physical armed security and also cyber security for corporations. So it's very unique in that they cover like basically two sides of modern police in, you know, in a setting where police are largely defanged, because any actual government agency that doesn't have a profit motive is just going to get in the way of corporate machinations. Yeah. Ryan, do you want to weigh in? And Chris, do you want to weigh in on like a big security corp?
Yeah, I'm sitting here realizing I don't know that much about the fiction of Global Sec other than what's on the Sony cards. So
there's literally nothing online. So you
yeah, I guess, but I'm just like my feeling from them, and maybe this is how the cards are themed, is that they don't feel as like evil and scary as the other corps. That they just kind of like have a job to do, which is just like they contract to like keep the corpse data safe.
Right. It's very, you know, it's not our problem. Like,
yeah.
You know, whatever the corp is going to do with what's in this shipment, that's not our concern. We're just protecting property here. You know what I'm saying?
I think the thing about that is that Global Sec appears that way because we get more of their, like, Sonny is an employee of Global Sec, so we see what Sonny's life is like. Whereas if, let's say, Bernice Mai was a runner, we will probably see a similar thing from Bernice Mai, where she goes home and has a family and has a life and, you know, is doing it to put her kid through college or to travel or whatever. And we just happen to be seeing that for Global Sec, and that just because we're kind of, you get that human face of the corporation doesn't necessarily make them any less shady.
Yeah, well, it plays into that sort of age-old question for Netrunners: who are the bad guys in the game? The corps of the runners.
And the answer is everyone.
Yeah, really.
Everyone except for Chaos Theory, basically, is a bad guy. But I mean, and I think that's important. And I hate to reference the New Angeles board game again, but it's again like the only place we get any other representations of Global Sec besides the actual card game. And in Global Sec, you use in New Angeles, you use the global sec like battle mechs to put down worker uprisings. Like, those people aren't just going home. They're getting cracked on the head by global sec. Like, global sec is an instrument of order and the status quo. And the status quo, they are enforcers of the corporate regime. And they're the best type of enforcers because they're not affiliated with any of the people who are directly doing the oppressing. Right? So all of these corps say, hey, I'm sorry that you got beat up at that demonstration. Of course, NBN would never attack people exercising their First Amendment rights. If those global sex security people hired by New Angeles got a little out of hand, we're not responsible for that. Meanwhile, they're like paying extra money. They're like, make it go away now. You know what I'm saying? But they have that deniability because there's that buffer between them because it's not in-house.
And that's something that's really interesting to me is the whole, they're not one of the big four, but they work for, it seems like, everyone else. So it's, they have their finger in a lot of pies, and it's what do they know that the other companies are doing that they don't know that they know. So it seems like everything's mostly on the up and up, but what if they're not? What if, some of the shipments get looked through before they send them off or anything like that?
Yeah, there's also this kind of idea that they probably have to, all of the corps, the other corps probably have to like tread carefully around Global Sec, because if Global Sec's people saw what was in that shipment, then they could tell HB if Wayland pisses them off, and they because they've got fingers in so many pies, they also have that kind of untouchable aspect of, well, fuck with me and you're going to know about it, kind of thing that they can threaten with.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
I like that. Yeah.
Sorry, can we swear on this broadcast?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. All right, great.
I don't know how to quantify this. I'm just using this as a placeholder for that thought. But I'm gonna say like behind the curtain, because they have like this thing where they're everywhere. So they kind of are gonna. From what you guys are saying, it's like this idea that Global Sec, whether they act on that information or do any kind of, extortion or anything like that aside, they have this information. They know about, where so-and-so's executives had to be extracted from. They know what facilities needed extra securities. So every company has to act with the knowledge that Global Sec, to the degree, is keeping their secrets, directly or indirectly.
Oh.
Right? So Global Sec has maybe a disproportionate leverage over its clients.
And Global Sec may not even know everything that they know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's like this double paranoia where it's like, do you think they know what's in that facility or what? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Global Sec's one word.
Yeah. Sonny knows a lot of Underworld contacts and film critics. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, she knows a lot of guys that don't know how to hold telephones.
Yeah. Well, it's the future. They don't need telephones.
That's true. All right, I like that a lot, and I think that's a good starting point for your corp, Patrick. And we'll flesh it out more as we get to the link phase and we start talking about the job that you did against Global Sec or another corp, or somebody may end up picking Global Sec, and we'll flesh out the corporation a little bit more. Who would like to go next?
I guess I will, and you guys can help me out with this a little bit. I was thinking about the Space Elevator Authority, kind of bring the beanstalk into this. For me, it's interesting because it's such a massive structure that has ties to, I think, a lot of the other corporations. I know it was built by Wayland, but I know there's a lot of the NBN kind of broadcast software on there. So what's interesting also is the fact that it's tied to, the solar system as a whole. You have things coming in, things going out, just a lot of commerce going back and forth.
Well, I think a big thing from what I've extrapolated from the lore, the Space Elevator Authority ends up falling.
Sorry.
somewhat under a neutral leaning towards NBN, just because of all of the telecommunications and information lines that run through the beanstalk, right? Like there's satellite networks as well, but most of the telecommunications really in the solar system runs through the beanstalk. So because of that, NBN has a disproportionate kind of influence over the Space Elevator Authority, but Wayland is the one cashing all of the royalties, who actually owns the physicality of it.
So I guess as far as tags are concerned, is this something where it'd be an NBN tag, a Wayland tag, or maybe both?
Well, so we have the benefit of the fact that a lot of this stuff hasn't really been gone over explicitly, right? The designers of Netrunner have really kind of only focused on the world bits that add theme and genre, and left a lot of the very specific nitty-gritty details. Yeah, I got it too.
Mine's in the other room.
But to the imagination, because they knew that, a piece of flavor text here, a reference to a character here would be a lot more evocative. We can do whatever we want. What do you think the authority would be about?
I guess one of the things I was thinking about was just the complexity of the logistics of moving things here and there. So it's easy for things to go missing, but at the same time, if you're actually trying to look for something, it could be very difficult to find.
Okay. All right. So one of the big things, and then I want the other players to jump in as well, is one of the most omnipresent and powerful cards in Netrunner is actually a card called Sea Source. And it is, the premise of the card is that because of the incredible economic and telecommunications might that the Space Elevator Authority wields, if they really want to find someone, they can spend money and just locate any one person who's recently made a cyber attack. So that's kind of one of the defining things that we know. Like the first card from the core set that actually references the Space Elevator Authority is, hey, this guy broke into our servers. Here's some money. Find that guy.
Okay.
And it's so, they're very much so actively involved in counter surveillance for the corpse, because the beanstalk is basically like the life tree of the modern net. Because NBN, because of a thing that we do not have time to go into in the lore, and ended up gaining a complete monopoly over telecommunications. So they run everything through their near-Earth hub on the beanstalk.
Okay.
So other people want to weigh in on ideas for the Space Elevator Authority.
One reason why the SEA is so dangerous and why they have such total control over information is just the stakes if anything goes wrong. It could be a global catastrophe if this thing breaks or, what have you. It's essentially going back to what I mentioned earlier of the novel Freefall. The reason it's called that is because the final act of the book takes place on the space elevator, and what happens when there's a rather severe technical malfunction and one of the bean pods goes flying off and re-enters uncontrolled. They don't fuck around.
Right. And that's one of the I think that's worth noting on, is one of the defining features, one of the grimmer features of the Android universe, though it's kind of an undercurrent rather than the system or the setting beating you over the head with it, is that there are a lot of just like complete monopolies over different things. And for example, Wayland and then the Space Elevator Authority has just a complete monopoly, because they're like, okay, you want to divvy it up and everything can get jacked up? You be my guest. Or would you rather things just run smooth and you just pay us our money to use it like everybody else?
Not if SSL has anything to say about it.
Right. So, yeah, it's a very strong monopoly. that they have on information and telecommunications, as well as over the elevator itself. But yeah, so when you imagine this, Chris, what did you have in mind for, how did you envision them being involved, like, terrestrially in New Angeles?
I guess in addition to all the communication and broadcasting, just the sheer amount of trade that goes through there.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
All right. So you want to basically have them, like, are you meaning more like just like they're the hub of like the shipping and receiving business, or are you talking about in a more clandestine sense?
In a more traditional sense, but of course the clandestine thing's always going to be there, but just, I guess, on the legitimate side of business, just how much moves through, going to space, coming back from space.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on the Space Elevator Authority?
It seems like this corporation, I mean, there's a sort of sense of like omnipotence. Like, there's not much information I could think of that they wouldn't be able to find out somehow. I mean, if everything has to go through them to some degree, they're going to be able to find out information on us or what we're doing or where we've been, like, way easier than probably the other corporations.
Okay. Yeah, they're pretty all-seeing, I think. Yeah.
What? Oh, that's a good joke.
It wasn't even intentional.
I mean, I think that's just a feature of the fact that they are the source of information. Again, no pun intended. Whereas everybody else is paying someone that they know or a connection at the Space Elevator Authority or at NBN's InfoSec division to get that information, right? The other corps don't have access to this information. They pay for access to it. Whereas they have this at their disposal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, all right. So, yeah, we can put that in there. Omnipresent. Put that in there. With that nice soft yellow. And then we'll also say that they're, what's the word for what I'm looking for? When somebody has, like, the shit that everybody needs.
Drug dealer?
No, but like...
Oh.
Like, when somebody has, like, control of a situation just because they have what other people need to do business. Do you know what I'm saying?
Like a monopoly?
Yes,
Stranglehold?
Yeah. Tags are hard, kids.
Uncompromising?
Well, I mean... and then we're going to eventually probably make some NPCs at some point. Probably not tonight, but as we flesh out contacts and do missions, you might have like long-standing rivals in these corporations that are various levels of executives or fixers, sysops inside of these corporations. Who would like to go next?
I can go.
All right, Ryan, talk to me. What are we doing?
So I think my corporation is going to be called Greenfire Development. So I'm kind of branching out and making something that's not, in fact, Greenfire, one word.
Development.
Something that's, yep. And so they're going to be a company that's owned by the Wayland Consortium, and they're, real estate, land development, all the kind of stuff that Wayland does best. So I'm thinking that as far as like tags, I'm thinking that this corporation tends to hand the word that comes to mind is brutal. That they solve problems just by beating people up, killing them, and they're not too secret about it because they don't really need to be.
Right.
So I'm thinking of that. What's that new card out of R&R where the guy's just like tied to a lamppost, all bloody?
Broad daylight.
Yeah.
Broad daylight. Yeah.
Because
So
the
it's
idea
kind
is
of
that they're willing to
daylight,
gun
the
somebody
corn.
down in broad daylight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think that's you know, I think Derek and you both brought this up when we talked about the setting. Is like Wayland, even more so than its obvious counterpart in the Alien franchise. Like Wayland in Android is terrifying because even though their relative power level in the game notwithstanding, they are as big as the other three corps put together.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where they just have they don't have hands in a lot of pies. They control most of the pies. Except for, you know, like the stuff that NBN and Jinteki and Hasbioroid specifically do. But like everything that they do as periphery, Wayland also does. So when you think about this, so what's their focus? Are they just like buying up like the sprawl, the places where, you know, the outsiders live and flipping them? Or are they doing focusing on some other aspect of real estate development? What did you have in mind?
Yeah, I think it's mostly corporate property. So they're probably actually like buying up like bad parts of town and turning them into these sprawling business areas, and so displacing a lot of people. Not really caring about the impact that they have on the city, but just kind of basically leaving a path of destruction in their wake as they kind of go through and just profit off of the land in New Angeles.
All right. Would anybody else like to weigh in on things that they have themes that they like for a corp like this that they'd like to bring up?
How topical do we want to get?
I don't know. How topical can you get?
I can get pretty fucking topical on this. One of the things that I've been reading a lot about in recent days, for reasons, is just the level of money laundering that can go through real estate development. Because people buy condos with cash, people invest in buildings, people sign letters of intent for development, and it's really it's a rich ground for connections to develop and for money to change hands and for favors to be bought and sold. And I think that's one reason why Broad Daylight is specifically a card that's designed for the division of Wayland that literally is just organized. There's no distinction between corporatism and organized crime. And there are areas of the world that right now that are like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's made its way into the game now. And I think that this, what Ryan has put forward, is going to be front and center for that kind of dynamic to play out.
Yeah, and I think a big part when you think about like real estate as like a project specifically of Wayland as we know them in the Android universe is that Android or Jack Wayland built his company on this grand idea of, you know, redirecting the Earth's resources towards trying to like get humanity off world. But in order to do that, he basically had to trick the worst people in the world into believing that he was the world's best hyper-capitalist. So like basically his lieutenants are like the most cutthroat executives that exist, right? People who are willing to destroy entire countries to gain access to natural resource. You know, people who are willing to like completely destabilize governments to make sure that they make the quarterly growth growth goals. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think just as an example of that, something that I always like to bring up is Project Vulcan in the Android universe, where Wayland built this drill, deep sea mining drill, and they figured out that it would cause this huge earthquake. So they bought insurance policies all over the Ring of Fire, and then bid on natural disaster rebuilding contracts.
Oh god, that was in Monster Slayer, wasn't it?
Yeah, for all of the cities. And then they used the drill, got the natural resources that they were planning to use the drill for, and then when the tsunami destroyed all the coastal cities, they cashed in on the insurance policies for the cities that they destroyed, and then also had the contracts to be the people to rebuild the cities, and then just killed everyone associated with the project so nobody knew that they caused that tsunami.
So that's what Greenfire is doing?
No.
So that's what I'm thinking. Like that. So I have an idea for that. This Greenfire is working on a project. My character knows about the project, but doesn't know what it is. So I'm kind of leaving that open to you, Dan. Of like, as maybe we discover like what is this thing that Greenfire is deciding to do? What's their big next move that's going to be very, very profitable for them and very, very bad for everybody else?
Right. Okay, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I think there's a lot of nougat there because there's going to be a lot of things that they can be involved in that can all be kind of fringe related to whatever this big initiative that they're doing is. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for jobs there. Like, I'm really excited with what we're coming up with so far because there's a lot of... We haven't gone super deep yet, but we have a lot of width, which gives us a lot more space to build on. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
All right. That leaves, before I do mine, because I'm a player in this game too, as far as the Sprawl is concerned, let's talk about you, Derek. What do you have in mind?
All right, so the company that I was coming up with is called Hasselback Solutions. And they are...
Spelled the way I would imagine?
I put it in the group chat in the app.
Yeah, okay.
So, and anyway, one of my favorite cards ever in terms of flavor from the Netrunner universe is Fetal AI from Jinteki, and because it really intersects between the ideas of Jinteki's genetic engineering versus the concept of what is an android in this universe, because androids are both clones and bioroids. That's why we don't use the word android for Hasbioroids robots, is because all artificial life are androids. And the fact that Jinteki was sort of moving into Hasbioroid's turf with this Fetal AI project, was very fascinating to me. But in terms of lore, we really didn't see it go anywhere. We really didn't see it developed. We don't know that Jinteki really took it anywhere because, subsequent elements of the game really went in a different direction. And so what I think I want to do with Hasselback Solutions is that they are a contractor firm. They're a startup biotech company that has either licensed or acquired the Fetal AI technology and is trying to see where they can go with it, and where that intersects. And one of the reasons I went last is because it kind of dovetails right into my character concept because I have a Bioroid PC. I think that this would present, a counterpoint in terms of, what is consciousness, what is personhood. I wanted to create a company that would provide us with a little bit of grist for some of those idea-driven science fiction stuff. Depending either as a contact or as an antagonist or as a target for a mission. I don't have any opinion, but this is the kind of realm that they're playing in. Is they are trying to really create a new kind of android.
So I have a clarification question, just for my own edification. Are they independent, or are they a subdivision of the Big Four?
I would think that they are incorporated on their own. They'd probably be, to the extent that they are independent, they wouldn't be wholly, I just used the word independent, but Jinteki would be highly interested in what they're doing as a license partner, and no, not necessarily any reference to current events in the Netrunner universe, notwithstanding, in terms of license partnerships. But that's something that I've been aware of for a number of years, is just how companies trade back and forth intellectual properties and who's developing what. And, there's like one of the reasons that Babylon 5 property has never been developed is because of some corporate bullshit at Warner Brothers, where there's a particular suite of executives that would rather have 100% of nothing versus versus 50% of something for them to let go of that property in any way, shape, or form. So really, I think how this company interacts with both Jinteki from the cloning side and Haas Bioroid from the AI side is a story possibility that I want to leave open for other people in the group to have input into, as well as maybe something to discover in the course of play.
Yeah, I like that. So, fetal AI, the idea of organic, artificial intelligence, and that kind of project. Does anybody else have any thoughts as to what kind of themes and what kind of parts of the Android universe that this Hasselback Solutions could have their hands in?
I think it would be. I don't know if this is what you were kind of intending to do a little bit with your corp, Dan, but we don't really. There seem to be all of these different Jinteki lines in terms of what their clones do, and you've got the Nisei line, which the most famous one being Caprice, who was a police officer, and then you've got the Tenma line, who are delivery men, and I'm sure there are others as well that are kind of hinted at, but it would be interesting to maybe explore other kind of lines of clones that were available, that were being developed possibly by a company like Hasselback, where Jinteki aren't necessarily interested in developing them themselves, but they might be happy for a company like Hasselback to kind of piggyback off their research and develop these new lines of clones, possibly with relation to AI and other things.
Okay.
I'm wondering if this corporation would be kind of paranoid, just because if they have success with the fetal AI, the Big Four is going to try to snap that up from them. I mean, there's not a lot of morals between these corporations. That I would think that they're licensing it out because they're not working on it, but at some point they are, and this is, it feels like a big joke compared to how Netrunner, what's happening with Netrunner, but really I feel like that they would be in danger. They have a target on their back if this actually is successful.
Right. That's something that I was actually thinking about as well when Derek was articulating his idea for this. If they're successful, Jinteki is gonna be like, "Oh, you didn't read the licensing agreement. We wrote right here that if you significantly move the line forward, that we own that development."
Or what's HB going to do if they manage to succeed as well?
Right, exactly. Because right now they have the cornered market on the true AI, or as true as it gets in the Android universe at this time. As far as we know, spaghetti monsters withstanding.
So I think that the secretive thing is good, because it could even be that it's not just that they're not kind of forthcoming with their research, but that possibly to an extent that they actively put out this concept, this idea that they're not doing very well at what it is that they're trying to do, and they're years behind where they hope they would be, and in actuality they're a lot closer to achieving the goals that they want to achieve than their public face suggests. And there's this kind of well, if Jinteki finds out that we're doing better than they think we are, then we're in trouble, so let's make it look like we're kind of incompetent. It's just a thought anyway.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I think that fits. Yeah, I like the idea of this a lot, because I really do feel like it's going into a kind of an undiscovered territory in the Android universe, as far as the organic AI research. All right. So I decided to go last because I wanted my corp to have the least impact on the discussion. Apparently my voice is coming through super low now, so let's see if I can fix that.
Sound fine to me.
All right. I've upped the gain, so I should be able to be heard a little bit better now. But so my idea for a corporation is called Hanryo Division, which I know that that word Hanryo is pronounced slightly differently than I'm able to. But what I wanted to do is a very illegal, very speculative division of Jinteki. So, in the Android universe, one of the big things that enables people to be ethically comfortable with the idea of humanoid clones being a slave labor is that they are not given higher level executive function and autonomy. The explanation is they're not really people. You know, they only really derive pleasure from working. They only think about work. You know, that's the entirety of their being is towards whatever purpose we've engineered them to be for, right? That's their explanation with, you know, as an example, the Tenma line. Like, the Tenma line clones only derive satisfaction and only wants to deliver objects because that's how they've engineered them to be. But when you do that, you limit an organism's ability to perform multiple tasks, and you've somewhat limited its ability to be specific, right? You've created a more general solution to a problem by stripping out the autonomy. But that's how they get around the idea of clones being people and being slaves, right? Do you think I'm making a fair extrapolation here?
Yep.
So for me, I want my corp to be a super on the down low pilot project of Jinteki, where these are Hanryo means companion in Japanese. So I want these to be the most expensive clones that they have. And on the surface, what they sell is high-end personal assistants and life manager clones to high-level executives. But what they actually are is custom-tailored companion clones to perfectly adapt and meet the needs of the individual purchasers from a career perspective, an emotional perspective, a day-to-day life like nutrition, cooking, butler services. They're basically the executive's body man, and if the person wants the clone to be designed this way, their lover as well. But in order to create a clone that can do all of those things, what you are instead talking about is instead basically a really pared down person with a lot of psychological conditioning to accept their job and work for the person that they're working for. So I want this to basically be a pilot program for a very high-end line of Jinteki clones that are very dangerous, and the customers don't know how dangerous they are.
So I have questions.
Yeah, go for it. I would love to hear your questions.
All right. So, are you thinking that these clones are grown to order to customer specifications that are derived through psychographic analysis of the customer, so that we deliver to you something that is spec'd to order, or is this something where these clones have a sort of psychological? I'm going to use a real $10 word here because I love science words. A pluripotent. They're like a psychological stem cells where they, once they're exposed and have experiences with their owner, that they grow to a customized state over time.
I had envisioned the former because I think with what I was doing, with this being very clandestine, the latter would be way too much of a information liability and a potential, like, we don't know what this person's going to do, this clone's going to do once it gets done growing in this person's care, and we can't be responsible for that. So I think what I had in mind was more that this company also indirectly through this service is like the ultimate blackmail corporation. They know everything about their clients. They know when where they take their meals. They know where they go off the grid to get entertainment and just pretend to be a normal person. They know where their families are. They know, all of their dirty dealings with other corporations, because these clones are basically like, I'm gonna extrapolate. Did anybody watch the Superman and Batman animated series from the 90s?
Yep.
Do you remember how Lex Luthor had that bodyguard / right-hand woman that was with him everywhere he went?
Yes.
The idea is that this clone is basically like having a second-in-command executive / life companion custom tailored exactly to your needs. So there are a small but very dedicated base of people who would want this product. But they would have to be super on the down low, and they'd have to be super private.
Another question that I had, is it your intention with this that Jinteki, whether knowingly or otherwise, has created a line of clones that is the closest to something that has actual personhood?
Yes, that's something that I want to dive into, but I want it to basically be that maybe even the scientists themselves don't realize how close they've gotten. Right? Where they're just like basically pouring more frameworks into the shell, not realizing that they're basically creating enough to create like a more functional, higher autonomy person. Right? The more functions you put into an android, the more it's going to be able to cross-reference and build a personality and build, abstract thought lines, basically. Go ahead.
This is dovetailing with so many ideas that I had for both my own corp and for my own character. I love it.
Well, the neat thing is like these two corporations, Hasselback and Hanryo, can be linked or they can be rivals. We can figure that out as we play and do missions. Or there could be back and forth corporate espionage where they're working with and against each other without realizing it. But we can talk about all that. Does anybody else have any questions about Hanryo Division?
One of the things that I really the theming moments in Netrunner that I really liked was during the Mumbad cycle, where with the clone suffrage movement and clones are not people, that there were there's this idea that Jinteki wins no matter what. Right, that if clones end up not getting rights, then Jinteki can continue to operate as normal and produce their product. If clones do get rights, then that means they can vote. That means that Jinteki now gets to print voters, which is a big deal as well. So I think the one thing Jinteki hasn't wanted to do up to this point is create clones that actually are people. And that's going to be difficult for Hanryo because they're getting close to that point.
Right. So I'm going to also, that's a big part of that friction with the ethos that has basically kept Jinteki safe, right, kept their business model safe, is like at the core of this division where, they're on thin ice, right, or they're very closely watched by the higher-ups in Jinteki, because they represent the potential for huge profits, but also a tremendous amount of risk. And there's probably a lot of people in the company who might even try to sabotage because they believe very strongly that this division can only bring harm to their product line and their the cultivated place that they have in the modern, Android economy.
I think we need to put Westworld Season 2 spoiler tags on this.
I haven't actually watched any of that show.
No, me neither.
Oh my
I haven't
god.
seen it either, yeah.
It's, yeah. But, so, we've got some good corps here. I'm really excited about what we have here. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to jump over to the faces screen real quick. And what we're going to work on now is we are going to work on going through briefly the playbooks that you've picked and a little bit some of the details of your character from character creation. And then we're going to talk about names, descriptions. We don't necessarily need to get into stats, but I'd like to know what cyberware and what moves you've picked. And if you haven't already, we can talk through them right now. That's part of what we're going to be doing to kind of flesh out our characters. So I get to make a corp, but I don't get to make a character because I get to play literally everyone else. So who would like to go first to chatting a little bit about their character?
I can go.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, my character is going to be the playbook of Killer, so his name. Well, he has a code name. He's kind of on the lam, so to speak. So he goes by the name Silver, and he is. I mean, the physical description of him is absolute unit. He's a very large man.
In awe of the
very
size
muscular.
of that lad.
Yes, I am. You will be in awe in the size of him, and sort of to the point where he kind of like shakes the earth when he walks. Like he's a very big person, and so he actually had been working for Greenfire as one of the executives, kind of personal bodyguard / hitman kind of person up until very recently. And so he looks kind of corporate in the way that he dresses. It's very kind of professional, and he kind of keeps his boots shined and everything like that, but kind of wears all black body armor, combat boots, all that kind of stuff. And he does have 2 pieces of cyberware because he's a killer, and so he needs to be sort of augmented to do that. And so his first one is he's got dermal plating, which is actually where he gets his name. So he's got kind of a silver mesh under his skin that you can see when you're up close. And that sort of protects him and kind of makes him impervious and to a lot of damage. He also has a cyber arm, so he has an augmented metal arm as well that he can use to crush people if it comes to that. And then Dan, I think for all of this cyberware, we also have to come up with where the cyberware came from?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, so for the dermal plating, I came up with necessity. So he's actually on the run from Greenfire. They want him dead. So it was kind of a dual sort of need where he did it to protect himself, to keep himself safe, but also to change his appearance. So he's a little bit harder for them to track down.
Okay, so...
so he did have... Oh, go ahead.
No, I just have a follow-up question. So... When you're
Sure.
hunted by a corporation for them providing your cyberware, I just have a brief follow-up question. What kind of stuff would you think you would have been doing for them? Like just like running people out of homes? Were you doing private security? Were you like working out of country for Wayland? What were you doing?
I think he was working. He was employed by Greenfire, but he was sort of the personal bodyguard for one specific executive on their board.
Okay.
And so he was, so whatever that executive needed him to do. So if he needed to rough somebody up, needed to protect him if he was going into a dangerous situation, or if he needed to go out and kill somebody. So he's not a hunter. So like they would hire hunters to find people, but then once they found them, they would send in my character to take them out.
You're the so-and-so needs to get a message, right? He needs to get
Right.
the message. You're the guy who knocks on the door. You're the guy from witness tampering.
Yeah, so I'm very, very scary looking, which actually one of my moves that I'm really excited about is called Serious Badass. And basically I can pick an NPC to scare whenever I go into a room, and then that freezes them in place to where they can't act because they're so scared of me. So that's kind of how that all kind of fits together. But I think this dermal plating he actually got just by, he was on the street and he was kind of kicked out of his job. So I think he probably found like stole it from somebody or went and killed somebody to get it. So he didn't get it from Greenfire. He got it out on the street. So he's going to be hunted probably by one of the criminal groups in also that's in New Angeles because he stole their some dermal plating from them.
Nice. Do you want to invent a gang, or do you want to use one of the big ones?
I don't know. Do you have a preference? I hadn't really thought.
So one of the things
That
that I
far.
thought of when you mentioned the Greenfire development and like the flipping of districts is on the other side of that coin. You have the people who created like the informal economy, you know, and mafias and big, large, sweeping gangs fill power vacuums, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Los Muertos, in Underway, where a lot of Wayland's notable renovations are, you know, which I know Underway is not in New Angeles, but I'm saying these types of gangs crop up to defend turf, basically, for the people that are completely outside of the system.
Yeah. So I don't think Silver is particularly diplomatic. So I think that while maybe Los Muertos could have been an ally, he just saw like they had the thing I needed, so I went and took it.
Right.
And so now he's got both sides, both sides of this war out for him as well.
Nice. Okay, yeah. And we can flesh out like what specifically that group, or maybe, you know, in between now and the next time we play, if you just want to come up with like a name and like a couple attributes for maybe the person who is your point of contact in that gang, who's maybe the person who, you know, his superiors are like, hey, you got to make sure that you make an example of this Silver guy because he fucked us over. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So somebody who has more of a vendetta against you.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then my cyber arm, I did get that, I think, from Greenfire, so they paid for it, so they're probably going to want that back.
Yeah, they'll just take that right off you. You don't need that.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then I've got a custom weapon. Rindon is my my high-powered automatic rifle that I got from Greenfire as well. So I will have that on me as well as a couple other sidearms and a machete, because of course I need a machete. And just to give my character a little more vulnerability, I decided. So he's got. Do you want me to go ahead and go into what his directives are?
Yeah. If you if you can just briefly go over your directives, that would also help.
Yeah. So the first one's obvious. He's rejected. So so I will get experience whenever my former membership as an employee of Greenfire Development hinders the mission, which these guys obviously want me dead. So I can see that hindering the mission at different points. And the other one is he's protective. So one of the things he didn't let his employers know is that he had a secret family. So he has a wife and a young son that he has kind of kept off of the radar as best as he could. But you know, now we're dealing with like C-Source and things like that. Like that information may come into play.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I think that's good. All right. So that's Silver, our killer. And what I'm going to do once we have the playbooks completely fleshed out for everybody, I will put those onto prettier character sheets and make those available in an imager gallery for our viewers to keep an eye on how they upgrade over time. Who would like to go next?
I guess I could.
All right, go ahead, Chris. You haven't talked in a while.
Yep. Nope. So my concept is the hacker class, which is a Netrunner. I have her kind of a little pudgy, overweight, impatient, kind of, you know, bored with her job. So she goes out and does other things. Did I give the name yet? No. She goes by Analog because she thinks it's fun. So I guess she pretty much works in the cube farm on the Beanstalk, kind of managing feeds, sending, you know, things back and forth as they need to go. But she kind of has a side job where some of the more, I guess she pirates feeds, I guess would be the best way to put it. So like all the pay-per-view stuff was kind of put off to the side. And since she does a good job in what she has to do, she ended up getting the upgrade for her, sorry, I'm trying to figure this out here, neural interface. So they paid for that too.
So you've got NetJacks.
Yep, NetJacks.
You can't be cyberpunk unless you're plugging a wire into the back of your neck.
Yeah, I kind of imagine it looks like Lando Calrissian's buddy from the Cloud City, that little just
Lobot.
Yeah,
Yep.
Lobot.
hmm
So yeah,
maybe
so
little
you have
dangly cords.
yeah, your character is comfortable with basically everybody knowing that like whatever you're doing for money, you're interfacing directly with the what in the Sprawl is called the Matrix,
Right.
which is the visual representation of cyberspace that the brain can understand.
hmm So as far as plays are concerned, I picked her at the place called Zeroed, which basically adds stealth to her deck, so that way she's hard to find. She's not necessarily the most outgoing person, doesn't have the flamboyant personality, doesn't like to brag, so just kind of sneaks in, gets things done, goes back out. Not really a risk taker, which is good in some ways, bad in other ways.
Okay.
Okay.
And so you did your cyberware. So where did the
Right.
cyberware come from?
Cyberware came from the SEA as
So-
kind of a mandatory upgrade.
So you're instead of doing hunted, you're doing that you're owned by
Owned.
SEA.
Right.
So you're
Mhm.
beholden to the corporation.
Right.
Okay, I like that. Now, when you think about, so you're strictly a professional, right?
Right.
You're not somebody who gets mixed up in kind of like the political game that a lot of the other prominent hackers in New Angeles do. You're strictly, I do the job, I get paid, which is probably going to make you frighteningly competent compared to a lot of the other people in the Netrunner universe.
But it's hard to get jobs if no one knows you.
That's
So
true. So your character is trying to avoid notoriety wherever possible.
right. Yeah, and as part of some of the directives I took, there's one called behavioral where you kind of work out your code and how it affects you, and I put down secretive, where if things start to get hairy, no matter what's going on, she's going to bug out, even if it compromises the mission. Just she needs to be, off the radar.
Okay, I like that. I like that a lot. All right. Yeah, so that's
Okay. Thank you.
Analog, which is going to be our hacker. Who's going to go next?
I'll go. So I'm going to be playing the Fixer playbook. I'm going to be playing a character called Trank, which is Tranq.
Now, just because I'm sorry, normally I wouldn't interrupt you right immediately, but for people who may be new to Cyberpunk and only aware of Android, can you explain a little bit about what a fixer is?
A fixer is the person who knows people and knows how to get things and can get you what you need to get the job done. They're the middleman. They are the go-between between the sort of people who want things done and the people who can get those things done. Whether that's through supplying arms or bodies or equipment or the skills that people might have that they link people to jobs and they know what's going on the street. They have all of this information that is useful and they're good. They're good people to know because they can get you what you need.
Perfect. That's a very succinct description of what a fixer is in traditional cyberpunk. So tell me a little bit more about Trank.
Physically speaking, I've played this character kind of in a different setting before, but the physical model for Trank is the WWE wrestler Shinsuke Nakamura, who he has this kind of he's got the kind of one side of his head is shaved and he's got long hair and he has the kind of the very cyberpunk looking jacket and is just generally this kind of like very smooth looking guy who also looks a little bit trashy, and that's kind of Trank's thing, is that he was born on the streets of New Angeles in one of the slums. He never knew kind of what it was like to live in archaeology, or he didn't have parents. He was just kind of an orphan who had to make his way up in the streets, and consequently got to know quite a lot of people and where things are, and where things tend to go down, and it became this kind of middleman that everybody knew and could trust if they can find him. Because one of the things that the extra move that I've chosen for him is that he's hard to find. So he keeps a low profile, actively avoids the people that he owes. But that means that when people do get in touch with him and they need the information from him, they know that the information is going to be good quality, and he kind of cultivates this reputation of being off the grid a little bit and hard to find, because he's not a very digital person. He's not plugged in the sense that a hacker would be to any kind of system. He has his own encrypted communications, which is the I think it's the gear that I can choose for him. I can give him encrypted communications gear, but also kind of leaning into the aesthetic of Shinsuke Nakamura, I'm going to give him an armored coat. So he's got this coat that looks like it's purely for style, but actually it's there to kind of help protect him. Okay. And what else do we need to talk about?
So we need to talk about cyberware.
Cyberware, right. I figured that probably Cyber Eyes would be the most useful to him. If he's going to have this encrypted communications gear anyway, that it would be useful to have these kind of these Cyber Eyes that allow him to get the most information out of a situation without having to kind of get too close. He uses them to kind of keep at a distance and gather the information that he needs. But I figured that also because he's from the street and he doesn't really trust these corporations as much as somebody who has kind of had a full-time contracting job with them like Silver might have done, that he kind of scrimped and saved to get them himself, so that they're a little bit unreliable because he got them from one of his friends who lives on the streets and does these kind of back alley operations. So
what's the tags that you took?
I haven't 100% settled on them, but I figured, so 3 of the following tags. Magnification is probably a good one. Recording and encrypted.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I meant the negative tags for them, you having scripted and saved for them.
Oh, right, yes. Sorry, let me just have a look. So choose one tag to apply. So I would say probably substandard.
Okay.
Oh. I'm not entirely sure what that means in game terms, but I think that is probably the most appropriate.
It can mean a whole host of things. Something that comes to my mind, just as an example, if something's substandard, it could do the job 100%, but instead of them just being like machine eyes, they're actually like they're big lenses, like your eyes have been replaced. So they're substandard in that they are much, much more noticeable and bulky than what would normally be. Or another example of substandard would be is that they don't always work consistently.
Right. I think that's probably more the second one that I was thinking about. So maybe unreliable rather than substandard is the tag that's...
Yeah, if you want them to be unreliable, that would be perfect, yeah. And
yeah.
And so you scrimped and saved, and that's how you got them. So let's talk a little bit about directives for Trank.
So the first one I was going with to kind of keep up this idea that he is a bit secretive and doesn't always necessarily want people to know where he can be found would be that he is deceptive. And are we kind of having to stick to the ones that are on the playbook, or can we choose other ones that might be...
You can choose whatever you want for your directive. They just give those as examples, as long as you can make a case for why you have that directive.
Right, so the other one that I was thinking was that he's an addict, and, you know, kind of hence the name that he's chosen for himself, is that he is just super into the idea of drugs. Any kind of, you know, substances that will alter his consciousness or be pleasurable to him, he is happy to do that kind of thing. And he is, over time, become addicted to them, and that sometimes his need to, you know, get his fix will get in the way of what it is that he needs to do.
I like that. All right. And I think also, just as a side note, one of the things when you were going over kind of the essence of your character, of what Trank's all about. If Trank, you mentioned, you know, that you wouldn't have gotten your cyberware from any of these corps because you don't trust them. But I also think it would go deeper. If you're somebody who was grown up on the streets and brought up through basically like the informal information economy, you would be completely disillusioned with the shiny aspects of the Android universe because you've seen the secrets underneath.
Yeah,
right? You've never experienced the benefits of the society. You've only seen the underbelly.
Yeah, like I like the idea that his encrypted communications gear that he's got is only encrypted because it's so low tech that it's impossible to hack. Like it's not that it's like super, you know, high tech thing that you can't. The signal is encrypted. It's just that it's so analog and basic that
it's a
all
boosted
modern
walkie-talkie.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like everybody has surpassed this technology so much that nobody knows how to kind of to get into what he and find out what he's saying. So I kind of like that aspect of it, where he's just this kind of like, he's so off the grid that even his communications technology is like two tin cans and a bit of string kind of deal. But yeah, no, I really like that kind of like disillusionment with corporate, and you know, he understands that at the end of the day he has to get paid. He's got habits to keep up, and he needs to eat and stuff, so he will accept jobs from corps, but he doesn't trust them and he doesn't like them, and he kind of avoids interacting with them if at all possible.
I like it. All right, so that leaves us with, last but certainly not least, Derek.
All right. Well, the character's name is Harlan. Harlan DN4H541G, which if you scroll up that center frame just a little bit, that was my role for cool back when I was fiddling with things. So, yeah. Actually, it probably won't fit, so let's just leave it as Harlan. Anyway, my purpose with this character is I really wanted to play around with concepts of personhood and sentience and artificial intelligence, again, playing off of, what I thought might be an interesting counterpoint with the fetal AI of an AI that is of a completely different type, and just to see how the two concepts played off of each other. My concept is dependent on a particular interpretation of the Android universe, in that HB's promotion of the bioroids as being entirely bound by the three directives of no killing, follow your mission parameters, and report back to HB for maintenance are not quite as ironclad as the HB would have everyone believe. They're there, but they're not completely inflexible, just because the more I thought about whether or not they would be inflexible, or if they are inflexible, then is Harlan an actual rogue bioroid of the type like Adam or whomever was the culprit in the Terminal Directive series? But I think those are more meant to be unique cases. Harlan has the three directives, but they are guidelines rather than rules. And as such, the tag for his cyberware is that he is owned. Nominally, he is the property of an LLC in his own name.
Okay.
So he's a corporate master as such. He owns himself as an asset of his own company. But he's still, in a sense, under lease to Haas Bioroid. He is still expected to report back to them for maintenance, expected to defend HB's corporate interests and propaganda. But I really wanted to leave that as an aspect of play that didn't necessarily have to pop up every session or be an obstacle to roleplay. So that was the decisions that I made there are not really necessarily decisions. Obviously, if the group has other inputs,
I actually just have a
more than happy to.
I have a
go.
follow-up question. So, just a question, just as how I should approach NPCs and people interacting with you.
Mm-hmm.
Are you masquerading as some sort of pilot project where people are used to seeing an autonomous bioroid, or are you under the radar pretending that you're dumber than you are?
Little column A, little column B. From what I understand, just from more reading, that bioroids are more and more ubiquitous, and oftentimes they do, operate unsupervised, and people are getting more and more used to, and/or more and more annoyed by the fact that bioroids are becoming more common in everyday life. There's some in the book. There's some flavor about. Some of the human first people getting more and more frustrated with how bioroids are everywhere. But yeah, certainly it's not going to be common knowledge that he is independent. And in fact, I don't want HB to necessarily know the degree to which he has acquired autonomy for himself. And I want there to be that tension between his desires for autonomy versus his directives, which would tend to work against that.
Okay. And just another tiny clarification bit. He doesn't know whether or not he's a pilot program or not, right? Like, he doesn't know if he's an experiment or an aberration, right?
No, and I think it wouldn't even necessarily occur to him to wonder about that, because one of the concepts that I want to explore is there are certain aspects of his inner life that are going to be remarkably impoverished, in which, that, like I said earlier, he wouldn't even necessarily pass the Turing test on certain subjects. It wouldn't even occur to him to wonder about whether or not his state of affairs is atypical.
Okay. So cyberware is going to be a little bit strange for you because you're a synthetic organism. So I guess we'll basically make it be like your systems that are built into your model. Are you going to go with being... Is that going to be what feeds into the you being owned by Hasbioroid?
Yes, I went ahead and I jumped ahead to and name dropped that particular trait. Mechanically, I just use bog standard character creation. I'm not really trying to go for min-maxing or anything like that. But I did take the chromed move, which allows for an extra piece of cyberware, which I think makes sense with the character. And that is where did they go? Still wires and synthetic nerves. Synthetic nerves, the enhanced reaction time. The skill wires, in that he can, plug and play skill chips, essentially uploading different skill subroutines. I think that makes sense just with his basic nature, and it seemed to be the best way to simulate that within the confines of normal character creation. As far as moves go, he's an infiltrator, so that is his basic profession. Covert entry, cat burglar type, rather than the social interaction type of infiltrator. Wise. Yeah, I didn't. The social maven type of grifter infiltrator I thought was very interesting, but probably not compatible with my starting concept. So his cool, edge, and meat are much better than his mind, style, and synth.
All right.
Because they're...
Yeah. So talk to me about directives.
His directives are network, obviously. When his membership in Hasbioroid hinders the mission, that will be, fodder for roleplay and complications and stuff like that. He's expected to report back to HB facilities periodically for maintenance, and I think he would probably break down in the field fairly quickly if he didn't. I thought about trying to have him go completely independent and have taken him off of Hasbioroid's radar entirely, not necessarily rogue, but just deleted from their records. But I couldn't really square it with him remaining functional with the need for regular maintenance. So this was how I tried to square that circle. And then the other directive, different small d directive, is violent, and that is he doesn't quite have the same innate human morality, empathy that it comes to how to interact with other thinking beings, and that can sometimes manifest in shocking and unexpected ways that a normal human wouldn't think to react in those ways. If anybody here managed to see the movie Upgrade before it disappeared from theaters, or at least just go watch the trailer that should be on YouTube, the AI in that movie is very much inclined to approach problems from a different perspective than the human character in that movie.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. So these are our characters, which I'm really excited. I think we have a really neat group. And so one important thing again also that kind of separates this system from Dungeons and Dragons or a more traditional fantasy RPG, let's say, is there isn't any trappings of all of you being friends or necessarily even terribly emotionally invested in one another. You are all professionally related, right? You've worked together successfully in the past, right? So you're professional acquaintances, and that's the starting point for this game. If friendships and other things evolve as the game goes on, that's fine. And with that in mind, what we're going to move on next towards is links. And links is important in a twofold way. It creates connections and points of contention between the characters over shared past, and it also gives us a starting point for how involved the various corps are going to be in your lives as you take jobs and do things inside New Angeles. So the way this is going to work is that each one of you is going to pick one of these corps, and it does not have to be the corp that you designed, that you have done a mission against, or not necessarily against, but a mission involving them. And then other people can jump in and say, hey, if you were doing that thing where you were getting that information out of, the Space Elevator Authority, then I would have come with you because, I would have been your XYZ on that job. And that creates a link between your two characters, which has a mechanical benefit, but it also increases the heat and upgrades the clock on that corp, making it so that they're more aware of you and they're more actively trying to either find leverage or hinder you in some way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
At the start of the game. So does anybody have something that kind of bubbles up to the surface, a job that they have in mind for their character as a backstory piece?
Yeah, I've got one kind of thought out.
Perfect. Which corp is it against?
So it's going to be Greenfire.
Okay.
Because it kind of fits into his origin story as not a enforcer for that corporation. So I'm thinking of job kind of loosely, but basically my thought process is that Silver was sent to eliminate a target by his boss, who I believe I'm going to call Niles. So Niles sent him to eliminate this target, and it was all going well. He goes in, and he typically doesn't really listen to what the people say. They beg for their lives, that kind of stuff. But the guy mentioned something called Project Terminus, and said that this Project Terminus that Niles was working on was going to kill thousands, maybe millions of people, and that something needed to be done to stop it. But me being just what my job is, I kept my head to the ground, finished the job, took the guy out. But then when I returned to the office, of course my employer had found out that I knew about something I wasn't supposed to know about, and then tried to have me eliminated. So in a bloodbath, fought my way out of that situation. Niles got away, but a lot of Greenfire employees didn't. And now I've been kind of on the street. Maybe made some of my connections with these other players. Either maybe I had them professionally before that, or in the time after that, as I'm kind of now working as an independent contractor.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that's a good seed. So I have all of the clocks up, but technically when somebody does a job, that's when I would start the clock for that corp. But we'll just remember that only the ones that have the jobs done against them have a clock at all. So does anybody have a way that they think that they could have potentially been involved in this in some way to gain a link with Silver?
I think it's possible that Silver came to Trank through some channels after this job was after the job was completed, and then shit went down in the Greenfire offices, because Trank could make him disappear and help him kind of lay low for a little bit, and knew places that he could go to make sure that he wasn't going to be hounded too much to begin with.
Kind of scrub his identity.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
I think the immediate thing that he would have gone to Trank for is, okay, yeah, scrub me off, but also, like, I need to, like, make sure that they don't find out about my family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something Analog could have probably done, is go into the systems, delete you from the employee files, erase your family's name, all that stuff. Which probably would have been through Trank.
Yeah, so if we go back over here to the clock screen, now what that means is, since we have on this mission that there was this action between Silver and Greenfire, and that 2 other members of the party were involved in helping him resolve that event. Each one of them are going to take 1 link with Silver, so mark that on your sheets, but not with each other. And also, the clock for Greenfire is at 1800, which is one of the higher levels of mostly benign interest, right? They're not actively disrupting, they're just trying to gather as much information as possible, and maybe if they hear your name, they follow up or tell their associates not to be involved or to double-cross you. But they're not...
I can turn up the heat one more notch.
Do I also take link with these characters?
Yes. So...
Okay.
Right. All of them take link with you, and you take link with them, but they don't get it with each other.
Okay.
All right. So Harlan, in his capacity as an infiltrator, sniper, and general stealth operative, was serving as Overwatch for Silver on the actual wet work assignment itself, providing backup, observation, and basically to watch his back. And I think Harlan would have been instrumental in actually getting Silver away from his own assassination attempt, simply because no one told him when to stop serving as Sniper Overwatch.
I like that. Now, Ryan gets kind of the final say here. Are you comfortable with all 3 of those activities being associated with this?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that it makes a lot of thematic sense for the heat to be a little bit up for Greenfire, for me especially, compared to the other corporations, just because I literally just fought my way out of there.
Okay, I like it. Perfect. So that is... ooh, I'm getting an echo somewhere.
So you're saying you're a high-profile target?
I'm a high-profile target.
We'll start a... card names are referenced in the game clock, and I'll just keep like a running tally of how many times we reference specific card names.
As soon as it hits midnight, we all die.
Yeah. All right. So who else would like to do their backstory job?
So I had an idea for one that Trank might have done for Hanryo, whereby one of their whether it's maybe one of their experimental models where they were kind of trying to work out the kinks, literally and possibly figuratively, where they kind of had this one of the models has gone wrong and has escaped. Maybe they got the level of executive function wrong, and they've given it too much autonomy, and it's realised what's happening and has bolted the coup. So they wanted, obviously, with the secretive nature of their work, they didn't want one of these models to be out in public, where any of the other corps could pick it up. People might find out what's going on. So they needed somebody to track this clone down, and they came to Trank to help out with that, because he knows where people are a lot of the time, and where things can be found. So they came to him for his knowledge of that kind of thing, and he helped them track the clone down to wherever it was hiding, and unfortunately the clone was tipped off by somebody just in time for it to escape. And Hanryo blamed the failure to secure the clone on Trank.
Okay. So basically, in your capacity as a fixer, you tried to help them hunt down this clone that could basically pass as a person, especially since it would have a non-standard appearance, since it would have been custom tailored to the client.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ended up slipping through the cracks, and so now they don't really like you. You're not somebody that they're into. Okay. Does anybody have any way that they might have contributed to this job? I thought that I have. So if we have somebody like Analog,
Mm-hmm.
who, in order to find this clone, you'd basically be pouring through New Angelis's like security data for a face that wouldn't be on any of the facial recognition databases because it's a clone. It's not a person with an identity card. So that would take a lot of work and a lot of like building algorithms and like long running like computer programs to basically scrub all of the data to basically build a profile and find this person. So do you think that's enough for your character to have been involved?
Sure, I think so.
And it's also something where, this is very on the DL stuff. It would have paid if it had been successful very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And when it got botched, it's not like they're gonna have, they're not gonna have told anyone about what happened. So in that way, your heat's somewhat, I would say, reduced, just because they can't be like, well, this guy really didn't come, this Underworld fixer that we hired really didn't come through finding that murder clone that we made, like, or that escape clone that we made. All right, so that
Isn't it a function of the increasing clock is the degree to which the corp is willing to risk getting, for lack of a better word, bad publicity in order to take action against the PCs?
correct? One of the things that I'm thinking with the player's permission is Hanryo tries to avoid that bad publicity. So the way I would like to quantify it is, instead, the more they are willing to leverage their relationships with various executives at other corporations, the more pissed off they get, the more willing they are to sick one of their high-level clients on the party.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? As like kind of a neat thematic thing?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we start getting into like 2300, 2200 territory, then they're going to start making moves, big moves regardless. All right, so that's Patrick. Or Trank, I should say. So who else has an idea for what their backstory mission is?
I can go next if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be great, Chris.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. With the Hasselback Solutions being so secretive, I'm sure there are other corporations that probably would want to see how far they've gotten. So I could imagine her working for a client of unknown origin to try and take some like project updates and things like that to, you know,
So
get an
just
edge.
good old-fashioned corporate espionage.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so you're gonna. I mean, there's nothing against in this system having the backstory missions having been successful. So you want to say that you basically broke into their servers and saw that they were hiding how far they had come and sold that information to someone through a fixer.
Sure.
All right.
This actually dovetails very closely with the mission that I had in mind for Harlan, in that him being an infiltrator also lends itself to industrial espionage. From a physical point of view, the effort would be not to break into their facilities or do anything that would necessarily be detectable, because that would set off far too many alarm bells, but rather the mission that I had in mind for him was breaking into a transshipment point and getting physical records of the physical equipment that is being shipped to them for installation in order to uncover the kind of work that might be doing. And this could easily have been done in concert with the web-based espionage that Analog is talking about doing.
Okay, yeah. Does anybody else want to have been involved in this job in some way?
I wonder if Silver would be tapped for sniper cover for that infiltration.
Okay. I mean, especially if you're doing like physical reconnaissance and things of that nature, there could have definitely been an armed presence, even if you weren't necessarily used. So, your specific skills, you think that they were maybe leveraging your experience, your intimidation? What do you think?
Well, it doesn't seem like. I mean, it sounds like the kind of job where they wouldn't want to be noticed. So I would think that Silver would have been set up on a building, across the street, with his rifle, kind of keeping watch on what's going on.
Okay. And Patrick, do you have something?
I'm kind of willing to solicit the opinion of the group on this one, but obviously, if a fixer is needed for that information, then Trank is a fixer, but. I do wonder if that is maybe not appropriate, because he isn't the kind of person who is like knows the big people who want this kind of information. He's more of a kind of on the streets kind of guy. Like he knows he's very good at maybe like when corporations come to him and need to find people on the street, he's good at that, but he's not so good at finding the corporations when people need to sell the information. I don't know what other people think about that, but
yeah, I think you're on the right course there. I don't think research espionage is something that would necessarily be in Trank's wheelhouse, especially to a first introduction to the other members of the party. But yeah, no, I see where you're going with that. Yeah,
I have a thought on that. I may, if I can take the wheel after we get done with Analog. I want to dovetail right off of this.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's good. So that's 2 ticks for Hasselback Solutions.
So who's linked on that one? I kind of lost track.
So that is you and Derek are linked with Chris.
Analog.
Oh, we're using our fake names.
Oh yeah, we're using our made-up names.
All right. So, I was thinking that either subsequent to the mission versus Hasselback, or what have you, or prior to that, Analog and/or Silver would have been instrumental in setting Harlan's fake corporation, the Shell Corp in his own name that owns him, that owns his chassis. And enables him to operate with a degree of autonomy. That that would need a degree of hacking and falsifying records and filling out paperwork and all of that stuff that you'd need to do to set up a company and have it acquire assets and then scrub the paper trail.
Okay.
Yeah, I almost feel
That
like
makes
having
sense.
having Silver just kind of standing over your shoulder during that meeting, just there to be scary, to like make sure it goes through. I assume it was a meeting in person with HB.
No, that meeting. This is done without HB's knowledge. This is Harlan deciding, possibly as a result of learning about the AI program that Hasselback is doing, deciding for reasons that may or may not make sense to normal people that he wanted to acquire a degree of autonomy for himself and coming up with this solution, and this is going down another rabbit trail. To what degree this type of solution might be known in the AI community, because this is a trope that I'm lifting both from the novel Altered Carbon and a book called Saturn's Children by Charles Stross, in that AIs actually own themselves by making themselves corporate persons. And I think that that's just a neat way to get around some storytelling dead ends that we might otherwise have.
So I think this would actually be increasing heat with either Global Sec or the Space Elevator Authority, because you're basically establishing yourself as like a notable, possibly dangerous oddity in New Angeles. Are you comfortable with that, or is that not what you had in mind?
No, I'm very open to whatever possibilities spring from this.
So, which one do you think would be a better fit for what you have in mind for how the world views what you're doing?
I think that this is more likely to come up on Global Sec's radar, because Global Sec has to, I think, keep their finger on the pulse of corporate life, so it has the potential to show up on their radar when suddenly this small shell company pops up that has very limited assets and doesn't really do much that is very typical of normal corporate business operations.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So we've already established that Silver would have been involved, basically bodyguarding you.
Well, I don't know. I'm second guessing that now. If it wasn't, like, I don't know. Silver's not the kind of guy who's going to do paperwork, so that maybe eliminates him from this one.
That's fine. Okay. Does anybody think that they would have been involved with helping Harlan become self-owned as a bioroid? Like, this can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that fits with your class. If you think that, like, android autonomy and android rights is something that might be important to your character, you could have just been involved because of that interest, you know?
I think part of, going back to kind of my mission at what I was saying earlier about how the clone was tipped off, and it managed to escape in time, was that it's possible that Trank tipped them off, because he doesn't like the way that the corporations treat these kind of non-humans, in air quotes for want of a better word, but and that he heard through the grapevine that this sort of semi-rogue android kind of was doing some kind of weird stuff with making itself autonomous, and he wanted to keep tabs on that and sought Harlan out to help him get the papers that he needed to qualify as a corporation owner. So like passports or identity documentation or anything like that. It may be even in a fake name. And this kind of created this fake identity to help him add this legitimacy to the corporation and maybe not necessarily have his name attached to it.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I like it.
Mhm.
Anybody
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, if anybody is familiar with like sovereign citizen conspiracy theories, they have this conception that every American is both a natural human and a corporate person, and that the corporate person is a straw man that's set up by the government to own your rights, and it's all a bunch of bullshit with like your social security number and your birth certificate. Like your birth certificate is actually a corporate document, and I'm just saying that's for real. That is exactly what Harlan is he's a corporate person.
Right.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that analog would probably help either get things put into servers or find, I guess, information you needed to complete the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Like finding loopholes or leverage on the like this would be like kangaroo court, right?
Yeah.
So you would have to find a way to basically get this precedent made under the pretty much under the radar, so it didn't make like national level news. So that's going to probably take leverage on government officials and somebody who's basically your handler at HB. So I think that is enough to warrant analog being involved, gathering that information enough to make it happen and keep all of you on the down low for now. But GlobalSec is definitely keeping an eye on this android that owns it himself, right? Mm-hmm. I would say that maybe they're not actively surveilling you, but maybe they're somebody, instead of just having the sheets and sheets of pages of the logs of all the bioroids going back for their firmware updates and their mental health checks, there's somebody actually assigned to your case, like making sure that there's nothing amiss in your updates and things like that, as this bioroid living in an apartment, owning himself kind of dealy. Does that sound fair, Derek?
Yeah. So
I'm
taking notes here myself.
Yeah,
one
right.
question I might have is sort of why Trank and Analog helped Harlan. Like, was it that they saw the value in having an independent bioroid sort of at their disposal? Or like, so what would be the reason that those two would take that risk to do that?
So with Trank, I think it's like I was saying about he thinks that the way that corporations treat everybody is pretty horrible, and he sees these the clones with Hanryo, and he sees the clones with the bioroids with HB, and thinks, well, they deserve better than they're getting from these corporations, and it wasn't so much from personal gain or anything like that. It was more to just be like, well, this is a good way to say fuck you to HB, and it might not go anywhere, but it's like a baby step towards maybe more people talking about whether bioroids can own themselves and be autonomous and all this kind of stuff. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess for Analog, it was more cultivating a relationship with something different. It's another avenue for her to take if she needs help or contacts or anything like that. So I guess it was purely business on her point.
Yeah, and that's fair. Make sure that everybody's keeping track of where you're contributing to other people's jobs and noting the link relationships, the two-way link relationships with those. So in that case, that one was for Harlan, and Harlan now has link with Analog and Trank and vice versa. So make sure you guys are notating these link relationships on your character sheets. But this is exciting because do you know what this means? This means that we have a completed template for the start of our adventures in New Angeles. We have the start of the corporate clocks, and we have the relationship, professional and personal, somewhat, of our characters to one another. And that means that I got to get cracking and I got to start working on some mission opportunities for y'all to choose between for our very first actual session, session 1. Before we do that, if there's anybody playing here, do you guys have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make on the session 0 information that we've gone through.
Is there a good reference site for some of this Android universe lore that I could learn more about?
I believe there is an Android universe wiki.
It's
Okay.
not very good. It's not very comprehensive. I would. You could do worse. It can be a bit of a slog, I think, but you could do worse than going on netrunnerdb.com and reading some of the flavor text on the cards. Because there's a tab called cards, and then you can choose packs, and it will show you all of the cards that are in that pack. And some of those cards have flavor text on, and you can kind of get an idea of some of the universe and the lore from reading that flavor text a little bit. So.
All right, that sounds like my mission.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a lot in the flavor text, and we can also chat about it because I'm pretty deep dive. Like, I'm like the opposite of most people who played Netrunner. Well, I can't say that for sure, but like a lot of people are like, wow, the design of this game is incredible, and like the story is really rad too. I'm like, wow, the lore is incredible, and there's like a cool card game attached. So like,
I guess the game's alright.
Yeah, I'm complete deep dive on the lore for Android. So, but yeah, I really like the starting point that we have here, and I think there's a lot of nice nougat mining company available. Did I lose it? Did I just lose everybody?
Nope, I hear you.
Okay. And I think there's a lot of good nougat here for us to mine. So, as far as scheduling for our viewers, we are going to try to stick to a schedule of Tuesday once every 2 weeks. Periodically, should scheduling permit, we might try for concurrent Tuesdays, but that's going to be based on the convenience and availability of our players. But expect once every 2 weeks as the schedule. I'll always be posting around to make sure that people know what's going on, and VODs will be, of course, available. Gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out and starting this great idea for a campaign with me.
Hey, is 9 to 11 going to be our standard time frame? Or are we going to try and hold it to 2-hour sessions?
Approximately, yeah. I find that that's really the optimal amount of time.
That's brisk for a role-playing session.
Yeah, well, I figure what we'll probably end up doing is we'll probably end up doing very contained. I have like a framework that I've been working on with other people who have run the Sprawl to basically keep legwork phase really tight and keep it from dragging.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll basically try to do like a half an hour to 45 minutes of legwork and jump right into the session. And, you know, if we go like 11:30, 11:45, it's not the end of the world depending on people's schedules. And if we have a really deep dive mission, we have to do legwork 1 week and the mission the next week. That's not the end of the world either.
Special 2-parter episode.
Yeah, special 2-part episodes.
Yeah, this really does feel like the closest I've ever come to like an actual Shadowrun television show is a show called Leverage.
Yeah.
This really does feel like we're setting ourselves up for episodic television.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the Sprawl leans towards. But yeah, gentlemen, thank you very much for hanging out, and everybody watching. Thank you so much. I saw all the new follows. I appreciate that. And until we see you all again, always be running.
Bye.